Hi friends, I am Akhil from Full Stack Academy. Today, we will see how we can use the new optional Java class in Java 8 and above and get rid of those annoying null checks and the null pointer exceptions in your Java code once and for all. If you have been working in Java for some time, I'm sure you had to use null checks very often. And as you mature as a developer, it starts bothering you. And you eventually start to wonder if there is a better way to do this. The answer is there since Java 8, and that is using the optional class. As the number of null checks increases, it becomes harder to understand the real business logic. So, optional introduces an elegant way to handle these null checks. It can conveniently substitute the conventional null checks and also handle the very common null pointer exception that we face in our day-to-day life. This is one example of replacing the null checks with optional. You can see the normal employee class is now wrapped in optional type, and the isPresent API is used to check whether the employee is null or not. So this just avoids the syntactical disturbance that a null check causes. But is that it? So what does eventually happen if you follow this? Actually, once you try this out, and when you use this optional at many places, if this kind of checks become very redundant, and instead of the previous null check, your code will be littered using the optional class at several places. Now, the optional class will become your new headache. So what's wrong in here? How do we overcome this? The key is to use Lambdas. You can see our first block of code using the isPresent API, but the same block of code can be rewritten using Lambdas in just 2 lines, and that is by using the ifPresent instead of isPresent. The ifPresent is checking whether the employee has an ID by just using Lambdas. So keep in mind, instead of using the isPresent, you must always use the ifPresent and other similar APIs available with the optional class. That will drastically reduce the number of lines that you need to write, and it will also clearly communicate the purpose of your code. Now if you compare both the code blocks, you can notice that the bottom one conveys your business logic in a better manner. Now let's see another example taken from an article written by Oracle about using optionals. So here in the diagram you can see our main class, which is computers, is having an inner class called soundcard, and soundcard is having an inner class about USB, which has a version string. So let's see the block of code that represents and gets the version number. So here you can see that the computer class is checked for null first, and if the computer class is not null, then it's going to get the sound card and again check sound card is not null, and then it again gets USB class from the sound card class and checks USB is not null, and finally from USB it gets the version. Well, if it cannot enter into any of these if blocks, it's already setting the version as unknown. So is it the right way to do this? Yes, it's the only way before Java 8, but using optionals. Let's see how can we modify this code to work with optional. You cannot use optional right away without any change. You need to make some minor changes in your class. So these are the changes that you have made to your class to support optional. So you have wrapped the sound card type in optional, and again USB also as an optional. So how do you rewrite this business logic now? Let's see that. Now this is how your code looks when you use optionals to rewrite your business logic. Here you can see you have access to all of the APIs that comes with optional like flat map, map, and or else. And you can see the computer flat map will get the sound card class, and the sound from the sound card you can get the USB class, and from the USB now you can get the version class, all without doing any null check. Because all of this is marked as optional, and it will look for that only if the value is present, and it need not have any null check to be done from our side. And here you can also notice an or else API that will return unknown if it's not found. So it's very simple to use this API, and eventually all of this will map the result to a string called name. So all the block of lines you wrote here are shrinked into just one elegant line which anybody can understand. Now your code is more clear and the logic is more understandable. So this is the benefit that optional brings to the table. Now we move on to another important question: when not to use optional. Why this question is important? Because you're going to have hundreds of DTOs in your project, and are you going to seriously use optional to all DTOs? That would be another nightmare that you'll be having a hard time to manage. So optional need not be used everywhere. You should know where to use it first before starting to use it. So let's see what Brian Goetz, the Java language architect at Oracle, advises. So he advises that we should never use it for something that returns an array of results or a list of results. Instead, you just return an empty array or list. You should almost never use it as a field of something or even a method parameter. So you can read the entire paragraph for understanding the whole thing, but the main point is that don't use optional everywhere, because eventually it will litter your code again with the optional class. So how do we know when to use optional correctly? Let's see that. Here are some thumb rules I personally found helpful whenever I need to figure out whether I should use optional or not. So the first one is that whenever you see a possibility for null pointer exception, it's okay to use optional. So here you can see that this class is going to throw null pointer exception at some point. Or when you are testing it, you can see that it already throws null pointer exception. So in such occasions, that you have to convert your code using optional, and that would improve your code readability, and it will be more an elegant approach for your code. And the second rule is whenever you see you're doing a lot of null checks. So if you do null checks to a particular DTO class at some point, then maybe it's time considering those null checks and replacing it with the optional APIs. So these are the two main rules that I follow whenever I need to use optional class. Okay, now let's summarize what we have learned so far. How not to use the optional class. Do not use it as a direct replacement of null check. For example, avoid using the isPresent API from optional because it merely replaces the null check with a method. It looks cleaner syntactically, but it's going to be replacing all the null checks with isPresent and optional, and eventually you will end up littering the code base with optional class. So that's not the solution. So then what is the solution? Let's move to the second point, that is how to use the optional class, and that is using lambdas. So leverage lambdas, that the features that comes with the optional class, and do not use just the normal replacement for null check. Use the lambda features that comes with optional so that you can write more clean and elegant code using the optional class. And now let's see the third point, that is when to not use the optional class. So it's not recommended to use optional for lists, arrays, fields, and parameters. So basically it's not a panacea, meaning you cannot use it everywhere. So be mindful where you need to use optional class. So how do we know where to use that? Let's see the fourth point, that is the optional class can be used whenever you see null checks all over your. So that's a thumb rule number one. Whenever you see a lot of null checks in your code base, try to replace all those null checks by using the optional class. And the thumb rule number two is whenever you see null pointer exceptions happening, or whenever you are catching a null pointer exception, try if you can replace that block of code using the optional class. I think that's it for now for optional. I know it's a quick summary, but you can explore more about optional and try to use it more in your code base so that you can write more clean and elegant code. That's it for now. Let's meet on another video. Goodbye.